Welcome to Authentic Educators, a podcast by teachers for teachers about best lessons, favorite classroom moments, and strategies you can implement today. Classrooms thrive when every voice is heard and every mind is engaged. But how do we move beyond the handful of hands that always go up? My name is Dave Brown, and today, Cody and I are diving into total participation techniques, practical strategies to get all students actively involved in learning and to ensure that participation becomes the norm, not the exception. In this episode, we talk about 3 total participation techniques that we love to use in our classrooms. Enjoy our conversation, and let's get to it.
Hey, everybody. We're in the middle of the school year. Congratulations. Dave and I were having a conversation today about how it's so important in classrooms to have as many of your students participate as possible. We often live in a world where whatever activity we come up with are going to be your 3 to 5 kids that are constantly hands in the air who want to participate. But then they're also going to be, a larger number than that are shy or try to kind of duck in a corner or put their head down, et cetera. And when you have classrooms, whether it's a full period or even just an activity where you know that 100% of your students participated, it just definitely has, I think, a better learning outcomes, a better feel, a better vibe, and more authentic experience for you and for the students. So we have 3 today that we're going to get into, 1 from Dave, 2 from me, and we think that each one of them you could really start doing pretty much immediately after you listen to it. Dave, why don't you start us off? You got tabletop review is the topic you wanted to bring up. I have not heard of this, so this is going to be new to me as well.
Yeah, so I love this activity, tabletop review, because it's a total participation technique. It requires absolutely no prep. There's physical movement, and there's some novelty. So you could do this with so many different activities, whether you have questions and you want kids to share answers to them, or it's more open-ended. And so what happens is you actually first tell your kids, you say, everybody sit on top of your desk or sit on top of your table, which is why I call it tabletop review.
Nice.
And I have them sit on top of their desks or on top of their table, which creates some immediate intrigue. And it's actually a way for me to track
why are we doing this?
What's that?
Why are we doing this? Why am I sitting on my desk?
Exactly. And it's a way to kind of build some intrigue. And it's a way for me, the teacher, to track who has and who has not shared. And I know some people might think like, oh, like that might create anxiety, but I can guide kids along and help them out so that they are able to answer, and I'll explain that. And so what happens is once somebody responds to a question or shares a response, they can then sit back down in their chair and it visually shows they've participated.
Right. Okay.
So I'll give an example of how I've used this in the past, and it's you could use it for if you have like a math worksheet, you could say like, all right, who wants to share the answer to number 1? And somebody raises their hand, they share. And then number 2, they raise their hand, they share. But you can also do it for more subjective things. So for example, in the past, when I taught English, I'd have students read The Most Dangerous Game, and they would track active reading techniques. So they could have any option. They could share like a connection they made. They might say, when I was reading this, it reminded me of the Hunger Games because, and they give a justification, and then they sit down. Or
nice.
They might raise their hand and say like, I made a prediction when Ivan showed up at the door and he was big and scary, or whatever it would be. Or they might say, I applied the clarifying technique when I saw this word and I looked it up. And so what's nice about that is there's a lot of freedom. Kids can share any active reading technique they did, and then they sit down and, you get to have everybody participate and sort of reflect on what good readers do.
So if you have like a class of 25, let's say, are you literally going until the last person is seated, or does that create any social anxiety of not wanting to be the only kid still sitting on their desk? How do you handle that situation?
To be honest, that's a great question. Normally, I'll try as a teacher to know the kids that can handle being last. There's the ones who I know are generally shy or if there's other past precedent to know that there's anxiety or something, I can modify by telling them in advance what we're going to do, and they can
Oh,
queue
great.
up their response.
Mhm.
The kids that you were sharing that tend to share first all the time, I'll delay so that they're at the end. And normally kids implicitly understand, and if it's not implicit, I can just directly say like, hey, this isn't about being embarrassed, this is all good. Like, somebody's going to be last, but that's not because they didn't have an idea, it's just because there's a lot of you to share, and you just don't make a big thing about it, and that seems to solve 99% of those issues.
And I
um,
imagine that this is probably just an activity that, you're not putting a grade or any, score
Oh, no,
associated
no
with it. It's
grade at
just
all. It's just a way to
an
share thinking, share
experience.
ideas. Yeah. And
Great.
so, again, you can modify this really with anything. Let's say it's a vocab activity and you have a list of 10 vocab words and kids wrote their own sentence. Maybe they all share their sentence or something like that, or mnemonic devices, or, whatever. I
That's great.
think with any, now teaching personal finance, I had an activity where I taught kids how to read a stock quote. And so I did this with a class where I had them all just share something they read. So they might share, like, they might say the last 5 years return of Nvidia, which I don't know offhand what it is, but it's an
Hmm.
astronomical amount. Or they
Right.
might share, like, in the past year, this is what the Nike stock has returned, or Apple's paying a blank percent dividend this year. So they
Right.
just are using the language that they've been taught in class, and it's also hopefully interesting enough that kids are getting little tidbits of knowledge in that context about different publicly traded stocks that investors can buy.
So rather
um,
than the traditional environment, right, in a classroom where most students are seated, this, I mean, they're seated, but they're seated differently, and they
yeah,
have to kind of move up, move down, etc.
yeah. And again,
And that
it's
sounds
just
great.
an easy way for me to kind of on the spot, if it's necessary to kind of coach or teach or clarify, I'm able to do that. But normally I get a good sense for if kids understand the activity or not, and then that helps to almost give me a little bit of feedback. It's a formative assessment almost, in a
Sure.
sense, in that I'm getting to see, like, all right, are they understanding whatever the content is that's being taught, if it's language or concepts or whatnot. So that's basically
Cool.
tabletop review, and it's very modifiable. I actually borrowed that idea, if I hadn't said this already, from a former colleague you and I worked with named Evan. So I love the idea because it's so easy. So why don't you tell us about Pass
Sure.
It Forward? You just told me about this. So our second total participation technique is coming from Cody.
Yeah, so I also learned about this in the district we worked in before from one of our instructional coaches. If you're lucky enough to work at a district with instructional coaches, I can't stress enough how valuable a resource that is to bounce ideas off of. And so this is a total participation technique that probably works best in sort of a review setting. So it's called Pass It Forward, and you need to do a little bit of prep to get it ready. And that prep basically consists of creating some form of Google or PowerPoint presentation that would have 4 boxes that you could kind of go from slide to slide on with different answers. So whether it's if it's important people that you need to know about, vocabulary, concepts, terms, etc. And it's primarily a review game. So if you get 4 pieces, 4x6 index cards, and you laminate them, if you don't laminate them, they often become a ball by the end of the classroom and kind of gross to touch. So you laminate them and you just write A, B, C, D on them. And you divide your class into, it can be 2 groups, could be 3 groups, could be 4 groups. I typically do 2. And it's just a line from one side of the classroom to the other side of the classroom. And you ask a question, and the answer options are up on the board. And whichever student is at the beginning of the line has those, A, B, C, D cards, and they can hear from anybody in the classroom. You hear them shout out A, B, C, whatever. Sometimes the kids get pretty clever and on the other team and start yelling out the wrong answers to try
Hmm.
to trick their friends. And they just have to take the correct answer and start passing it forward. So it physically has to go through the hands and touch every single person on the team before it ends up at the teacher. So I'll stand at the front kind of with my 2 hands just extended, and whichever card gets to my hand first, I hold my hand up, I look at it, and if it's the correct answer, then they earn the points.
Cool.
If it's the wrong answer, or if a student realizes halfway through they're passing up the wrong response, it has to go all the way back to the beginning before the new correct answer can come forward. And so it's this total participation situation because every student has to either be actively or at the bare minimum, like passively, like, yes, I agree with this response as they move
Right. Like
forward.
if they disagree, they got to send it back. And you said again, they can be talking to their classmates,
Oh yeah,
like their team.
it's a noisy environment.
Yeah. Which is fun
It's
sometimes.
an energetic environment, and after each round you rotate. So if you're at the beginning of the line, you move one forward, move backwards. So
Hmm.
ideally, you'll have enough questions so that every student gets the opportunity to be both the student grabbing the card first or the student handing it to the teacher last.
So really, if
Um,
you have an old quiz that maybe you're like, oh, this is a boring way to review this content, you could
yep.
literally just take those questions as long as you have A, B, C, D.
Mm-hmm.
Or I mean, you
Yep.
could modify this with just A, B, C, I assume, even, right?
Yeah, I mean, you can. A couple ways that I've done is I'll just create a thing on Google or PowerPoint, and then just like copy slide and then just change the answers, right? And
Hmm.
then you can reuse it from year to year. Another thing that you can do on Quizlet is and a Quizlet, is a great platform. If you haven't heard about it, it does have a paid version, but for the free version, you can create your questions, and then there's like you can click review without having to pay anything, and it'll automatically kind of like put the four squares and make it so that you don't have to
A
create any of
multiple
those slides
choice kind
yourself.
of
So
quiz, right?
exactly. And
I
you can
love
like do all
Quizlet,
types
by
of
the way.
fun things with the points, right? Be like, each one forward is a point. I'll usually have like a physical die in my classroom that I'll roll. So there's a bit of chance to it, or you can have the person that gets to the
I
front
like
takes
that.
takes a
So that
basketball shot. Go
that
ahead.
way, if the one team has the kids that kind of are the whizzes in the class and they're getting everything right, they still
Yes.
might not necessarily win because somebody gets luck of the draw and they only answered one question, but they got 6 points for it or something.
Yeah, so there's
I like
ultimately that
that.
luck factor that you
Yeah.
you can't control, but it keeps people in the
I've
game.
a quick little analog. I've seen something before where kids get things right and they get to collect like either a poker chip or you could make stars or something that you print
Hmm.
out in different colors. And the
Oh.
catch is every color is worth a different point value, but they don't
Oh,
know the point value until the end of the game. So if they're
oh,
collecting all
cool.
red stars or red poker chips or whatever it is, uh-oh, those are only worth 1 point. But if they were
Do you have
collecting
them like
blue
laid out in
ones,
front of you? Like
yeah,
you can
and
pick like
each
a
time
red
they
or a
answer,
blue
they
or a
take
white?
one. Exactly. So let's say you hit
Oh.
a red, a blue, and a white. It could be 1 points, 3 points, 5 points. So you don't know what's worth what.
Oh, I
So
love that
maybe
idea.
your strategy is to commit to one color. Your strategy is to try to take a mix of each. So that's a
Hmm.
way that you could make it so that it's not
They don't
you
even know
know,
who's going to
the
win until the end,
yeah, and it's not the
right?
kind of, I hate to use this word, the quote smart kids that are
Sure.
getting all the points and prize or whatever. I don't know. It just opens it up so everybody feels a little
Yeah.
more interested and engaged, and they're not feeling shamed if like, I don't know any of this. They can really feel
And the kids in the pass it forward, if it's a student who struggles in your class, if they're the ones picking, first, they're probably going to rely on their classmates like in another part in the line like telling the answers, but it still forces them to go through the act of selecting the correct
right.
choice
And
so that
and
they don't just like sit and let everybody else do it. Like
and
they're
so
part of it.
each team has, I'm sorry that I didn't catch this. Each team has four cards, right?
Yeah,
It's
just a
not
card that
one
says A,
card.
B,
Yeah,
C,
okay.
D.
At
Correct. So
first,
like
for some reason, I was thinking it's one card with all letters, but gotcha. So every team, so
yeah.
you as the teacher need to prep six or whatever different A cards, six B cards, six C, or however many teams
Most of
you.
the time I just do two teams. So I have an A, B,
Oh,
C,
so you've got a
D.
team of 12 and 12 or something like that.
Yeah, but you can, like I said, you could have three teams or four teams,
Yeah, that's
however
cool.
you
I
do it.
like that a lot.
Depending on
Why
how
don't
big your presentation board. So,
right?
so it's like a little bit of prep, right? You have to put the thing together, but it's
Yeah, but
honestly
easy to
not
modify if
much.
you have any multiple choice worksheet
Yep.
or quiz or test or whatever it
Correct.
may be. Or I love your suggestion of just using Quizlet because it can
Yeah.
generate multiple choice stuff for you. And then let's wrap up. You
Yeah.
you were just telling me about debate carousel, which I
Hmm.
actually saw you do one time when I was I think 5 years ago or so. I was subbing
Okay.
for a co-teacher of yours, and I was in the room with you when
Oh,
you
that's
did this. So
right.
this is cool. I've seen you do this before. So I can validate this that this is a great idea. So why don't you tell listeners about debate
Sure.
carousels?
So credit actually goes to one of our prior guests, Tom Stecker, that we interviewed about social emotional learning. I picked this up when I was doing my plus 30 in one of his courses. We did it in class as adults. I said, this seems good. And I tried to do it at least a couple of times every year since. And it's a total participation technique that students enjoy. So for this one, it's as long as you have some sort of thing in your class that you're discussing where students can take a stance on it, they agree with, they disagree with. In an English social studies class, like the amount of possibilities is basically every day. So science classes, I'm not sure about our math friends out there, but I know you teach business. You totally could, would NVIDIA be a good buy right now? Yes or no, right? Like as long as it's some statement that you can have an objective yes or no opinion on. You print out. You could, I guess, use those little, whiteboards if you have them in your class. It works a little bit better if you just print out on the sheet of paper, and you would only need just 4 squares, or even honestly, the kids can take out a sheet of paper, right, and say, hey, divide this into 4 boxes, 1, 2, 3, 4. So you put up the question on the board, or you have them printed out, so the question's on the paper. So I'll use something that I did from Lord of the Flies back in the day. The boys' choice to nominate Ralph was a good decision, right? Talking about leadership, like was that the right call or not? So the kids sit there at their desks, and the goal is for them to write 1 or 2 sentences. Not a lot, right? This isn't something that they should be writing a full paragraph for. And in the first box, which you can make whichever box you want, I use the top left, is they yes or no, and why. Nominating Ralph was the right decision because, and then they just write 1 reason, potentially 2 reasons. So you give them, a minute, 90 seconds, depending upon your group of time to work. And then they clear their desks of everything, and they just have this paper out.
Is their name on it, by the way? Does that matter? On the back, maybe?
It could be on the back. I mean, a lot of times the kids will know where their friends are seated, so it's kind of like implicitly there. But
okay,
that you could or you couldn't. It doesn't matter. I think the objective is achieved either way. And so where the beauty of this comes in is you stand up, and then you walk to a different desk. You sit down.
The students
Correct,
stand up.
students.
Okay.
Yep. So
and
students.
Are you
So
telling them
everybody's
where to go? Is there an order?
no, just go sit. Right. Sometimes it becomes like a little
open seat.
I don't want to be the last one, so they kind of shuffle, and that becomes a bit
So
fun.
there's some musical chairs here, sort of.
Little musical chairs, right?
All
Like
right.
nobody gets eliminated. And if
Yeah.
you have a kid with those social anxieties, you can maybe like stand near her and say like, "Hey, go sit here really quickly to give her a leg up." So when they sit down for the second rotation, they look at whatever their classmate wrote in the first box. So yes, it was a good decision to nominate Ralph. And whether they agree with it or disagree with it, they have to, in box 2, come up with another reason that someone that thinks that way would feel that way. So if it was yes, because he seems to be very smart, is box 1. Box 2 could be yes, because he's older and has more experience, whatever that might be. And the key thing is that you'll see some kids be like, no, this isn't correct.
Yeah.
But
you're stretching their thinking.
You're stretching their thinking and making them think, essentially, putting themselves in somebody else's shoes. Why would somebody else think that way? Which I think is a really important concept. So then you rotate again. The key is you can't go back to a desk that you've been in. So it becomes a little bit trickier in rounds 3 and 4 because I've already sat at that seat, and you just have somebody switch. It's a simple fix. Box 3 is you come up with whatever reason 1 and 2 said. So yes, and now you have to come up with a no.
Okay.
It was the wrong
or if
decision.
they started with no, now you have to say yes.
Correct. Okay. So whatever the paper in front of them says in boxes 1 and 2, you have to say the opposite in box 3.
I love that.
Fourth rotation, and again, you're only writing 1 or 2 sentences in these boxes. Then the fourth box is they sit down at a new seat that they have not been to, and they revisit what they actually think. So maybe they feel exactly as they felt in box 1. They can literally write what they wrote on box 1 on their paper, their home paper. They can do that on this new desk. Maybe they still feel the same way, but they saw a better reason out there. Maybe they've changed. And then the best part of this whole activity is then we return back to their seats, and they look at the conversation that took place on their page. You have to remind them and be like, hey, wait, Dave, if you see Dave's name on box 2, remember Dave might not think that.
Yeah.
Right. And stress that. But it's really interesting where you then try to like segue into a conversation about, well, what did you see? What did you think? How's your thinking changed? How's your thinking grown, et cetera?
Yeah. I think why something like this is cool is there's the intrigue of, well, what did my friends or what did my peers say? So that just kind of inherently makes it a little bit more interesting. And I
Hmm.
guess there's something performative here that I would hope makes them, you know, participate because they know other people are going to see their work. And
Correct.
um, so I really love that. And unless you've got anything else to say, I think those are three pretty easy to implement um, activities that gets the whole class involved, which is obviously so important.
Hmm.
And it makes it fun too, which ties back to, it seems like, our ever-growing theme of everything we do here, which is to be a good teacher, you have to teach the whole child, and this social emotional element matters so much. And this just
Absolutely.
helps to add to, you would hope, a community that you build of celebrating learning, celebrating ideas, and all of this is relatively uh, not crazy stressful, I would
Yeah,
think and
I think
hope.
all these are doable in most classrooms today, tomorrow, without a lot of effort and a lot of prep. And if you have ideas, listeners out there, that are similar to what we've discussed, we'd love to bring you on as a guest and have a conversation. You can reach out to us at authenticedpod@gmail.com. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Authentic Educators, a podcast for teachers by teachers about best lessons, favorite classroom moments, and strategies you can use today. Have a great day, everybody.